Today, I want to explain why I intentionally run towards messy deals and why some of my best performing deals actually turned out as pretty complex and pretty crazy that nobody else wanted. Today on the Furlo Capital Real Estate Podcast, where we dive into the intricacies of real estate investing, including complex, messy deals. And our mission is to equip people to invest wisely, no matter the level of complexity, so that we can invest wisely in both property and people, so that together we can build wealth while improving housing. I'm James. I can see you mouthing along. Jesse, my wife, how you doing?
Good. I know. I'm trying to remember it too. I'm like, hey, how did it go? Oh yeah. And I like the hooks inserted in. It just makes it hard because you memorize it a certain way, and it's like, wait, that's different.
I know.
I don't know. You just talk about messy, and it makes me think of hair for some reason. I got my messy bun in.
Yeah.
Messy hair.
It's all right. You weren't alone today.
Why am I thinking about hair?
I met with some other people who had messy buns in.
It's messy bun day.
I know what that is.
Yeah. My bangs were not playing along, so I was like, okay, fine.
Sounds good.
Do it pulled back.
Well, we're not going to talk about messy hair. We're going to talk about some messy deals.
Which, I don't know. That sounds scary to me.
I know.
I know.
That's why we're going to talk about it.
I'm glad you're going to define it. Because I think other people too, you say a messy deal and they're like, oh, no. That's a bad deal. It's like, no.
But ideally, ones that are messy with some asymmetry because, and we're going to dive into this, problems create pricing errors and creative finance thrives on urgency and under-optimized assets age better than perfect ones if you know how to solve what others choose to avoid. Mm-hmm. Okay?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're accepting a problem, but you have a solution.
Yeah. So that's actually reason number one. Problems break price discovery.
Yeah. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So there are, we're going to call them clean assets, not so messy, well put together ones, right? Those are put into efficient markets. Think like the MLS, LoopNet, Zillow, those kind of things.
Like a standard deal where you're like, it's nice, everything's fixed. It fits
cutter,
the price range
and
that
so
you would think.
The price is kind of what it is. The market really determines what it is. However, messy assets, they don't have that. Like they might have expired leases that are on there. Like, okay, how do we value this? Or there might be some mixed use confusion. What is the true value of this thing? There might be a lot of deferred maintenance. How much will it actually cost to bring this up? What will the value of it be once it's actually been repaired? And oftentimes there's just no good comps to go with it. Yeah. And so you can't just look at those other properties. So what that means typically is that there are fewer buyers, and that means there's a wider range for what the price could be.
Right. Because if you can validate one reason or another why it would be that way, then people will have to take it because it's like, well, we don't have any other comparison.
I'll often look at deals, especially on the commercial side, where there's a big difference between an owner-operator, someone who's going to move into it and rent it themselves, or own it themselves, versus someone like me, where I'm like, well, I'm going to own it, invest it, and I'm looking to get a return.
Sure.
Oftentimes you get people who they'll just pay more because they're like, I have a totally different use for this. I don't actually care about the ROI. I'm just trying to save my rent. And in 20 years, I kind of care about what the value is.
Because
not really.
when they resell. But
it's more like I don't want to have to ask permission to do all the repairs and stuff.
Yeah.
I just want to do it myself.
Yep.
And that has value, which I totally get out of it.
Yeah, that could be one way that you solve for a messy deal. So you're like, I'm just going to do it myself. Is another way to say that, like, there are just a lot of unknowns about the property.
Yeah.
And so it takes a little bit more effort to figure out what you could do with it, or what the price is, or what it qualifies for as far as lending or whatever.
They often talk about in real estate, unique is a 4-letter word. Like you just don't, no one wants to hear that word. Yeah. Because of all those reasons. You're like, man, well, what is the true value of this? Well, what did the one similar to it sell for? There was no one similar to it. Okay. They've semi-solved it on the commercial side of the world because you could just look at, well, what's the net operating income? And now let's look at assets that sold for a similar net operating income, but even then it's like, if you have one that's a storage facility versus an apartment unit versus
like retail
warehouses,
space.
Retail, you're like, okay, the NOI might be the same, but how you got there is very totally different. The lease structure is very different. But still, it's an way that kind of gets you closer to it.
Huh.
Yeah. Reason number 2, Out of 8, by the way.
Oh,
so yeah, so we got a lot.
Calibrate myself.
Yeah. So we can spend forever on one of them and just sit through the others. Messy deals filter out spreadsheet only buyers. Yeah. So many investors they can model. It's funny. I actually took a, I don't know, it was like a mentorship course thing when I was first got into syndications and raising funds, and it was shocking how many people were like, "Oh, I don't like talking to other people. I just want to do the spreadsheet thing." Like that's what they want to do. Like I analyze deals all day long on a spreadsheet. Like cool. Okay. I mean, that's good. Super good value.
To a certain point, sure.
I'm there too. I get it.
Yeah.
But a spreadsheet samurai type of person, they're just really going to struggle with. Yeah. Like, well, I don't know how to.
Well, obviously, because
things.
It's like for a spreadsheet, you have to have some knowns. That you plug in to the equation.
Yeah, and oftentimes messy deals require like judgment and sequencing and just patience.
Yeah.
It's
or
just
flexibility. Like, like okay, maybe you have to be flexible on timing, or you have to be flexible on what type of repairs you're doing, or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
the type of tenant that you get in there, whatever.
Yeah.
Reason
number 3 is creative finance only works when someone needs a solution. So creative finance is you're not just offering them cash. I mean, you might be, but you're saying, hey, I'm going to do some sort of financing either with you, Mr. Seller, taking over your existing debt, or you're going to give me new debt, stuff like that. Yeah. That requires someone who's not just selling to maximize their return for it. Yeah. And so the reason in that case, the property may not be the messy thing. The person selling might be in the messy situation.
So give me an example of creative financing that makes a deal unique. Like a theoretical. Or maybe an example of something you've worked with before.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, so like we had one where we bought a house. It was a guy who was older and could no longer live there. They were thinking about moving him in a hospice. They didn't need the cash up front, but they needed to somehow resolve the property. Like they needed to know what its next step was before he passed away. Otherwise, it was going to get really messy on them. And so for them, they were like, yes, we want to sell to you. But they're like, but we don't need the cash. We would rather collect the interest over the next year, and then we'll get the cash plus some interest for it. And so it's usually, are they looking for greed or speed? Those are kind of the ways to think about it. If it's greed, you can do seller financing because you go, hey, you'll actually make more in the long run because you get interest for it. If you're looking for speed, that's where you can go the seller financing. Like you can, you're doing like a subject to taking over whatever existing debt they have. You go, we'll just take it over. There's no qualifying, no nothing. We just move on.
Yep.
Yeah. And so kind of depends on what their wants are. But that's a situation where like it was messy because we weren't actually talking with the seller. We were talking with his power of attorney person who was making all the decisions for them. All right. And so those are cool. That's a messy deal.
Helps me wrap my head around it a little bit to have an actual scenario, I guess.
No problem. And so the big thing there is like you're not just like, don't think of it as like, oh, I'm buying an asset. I mean, you are, but it's really like you're just solving for problems and constraints and figuring out.
And I would imagine
those are messy.
Like the speed deal is like someone just wants the cash to be able to move or invest in something or whatever it is. And it's like, I don't want to wait around. I don't want to have financing. I just want I want to get rid of this asset so I can move on to something else.
And sometimes you have someone who the house itself is in big time disrepair. It's not going to qualify for traditional financing. So they can't just put it on the MLS because they're not going to get it. What they're going to get are cash buyers who go, hey, I'll give you cash at a massive discount. Yeah. And again, the greed part comes in to go, well, I don't want to do that. And so you're like, well, if you're willing to defer a little bit, that has value. And so you play that game. All right. Messy assets also, there's number 4, hide multiple independent income streams, potentially because it's a messy deal. So like when I bought the Baker Tower, that was messy in the sense that there was commercial and there was residential.
Oh, okay.
And
I see what you're saying.
But there's also a ballroom that was there, and there's amazing views. And so there's like,
there was also like the lease different for the towers.
The towers, right?
Yeah, it was
I totally forgot about that part. Yeah, so that's usually in the mixed use space. Those can look a lot uglier and messier on paper because like, oh man, I don't really know. And because again, in like storage doesn't equal retail, doesn't equal residential, doesn't equal industrial, and the demand cycles themselves can all be different. And so how you value those is tricky.
Yeah, and I could see wanting to have not a ton of mess, but some mess because the types of properties do differently in different seasons. So it's like, okay, your residential might have a ton of vacancies right now, but other things might be supplementing that income. So it's okay because your retail spaces keep staying open and whatever it is. So
here's a question for you. Would you rather have one amazing tenant or 11 okay ones?
11 okay ones.
Yeah? Why?
Well, because
that's so messy. Look at you.
It is messy, but if one leaves, I still have 10.
That's true.
Who can pay most of the building's mortgage.
Yeah.
As opposed to if one's gone.
Yeah, and you're talking about the vacancy risk, right? So you're willing to deal with the operational messiness of more tenants, even if they're not as amazing.
Right.
To take care of it.
I mean, I guess it depends what you're willing to put up with. And if you can float the vacancy risk to have a great tenant in there, maybe that is better.
Yeah.
I don't
know. Reason number 5. This one's controversial. You may disagree with this one, but operational complexity can reduce financial risk. Okay, hear me out. So if you have a lot of things that go on with the operation, there's just a lot of components to it. That means that there's smaller failure modes that could happen. So for example, vacancy becomes granular instead of catastrophic. Because, and we'll go back to the Baker Tower as an example there, right? That's operationally very complex. But if one tenant moves out, you're like, okay, whatever.
It's like what you were just describing.
It's very similar.
Yeah.
But even just on the, it's another way of saying for that mixed use. It's slightly different in the sense that it's not just the income streams, but it's on the operation side as well. You get, it's not the vacancy side alone. It's also on the operational side. There's advantages to that. And there's also potential for doing things better and more efficiently. You can improve the systems because there's a lot of them. Like, for example, if you've got a place that, I don't know, it's all one big shared water thing. There's an opportunity there to add complexity to say, hey, we're going to sub-meter these things out, or we're going to do some ratio utility billing. It adds a lot more complexity, but can dramatically increase the revenue because now you're figuring out, okay, here's how I'm going to proportion this expense out to that specific tenant or whatever. Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that it would be better to have a building, I don't want to say this, that it would be more efficient to have a building that has all the same types of tenants? Like what you just described.
There's value to that.
Is like, there is complexity. However, it's like if all of your tenants are retail, your systems can be overarching, with the whole place, as opposed to like, okay, well, I have certain systems for these types of tenants and then different systems for residential tenants and even different systems for like rental type clients. But
it depends.
Maybe that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. Because you could have, like, if you've got residential and commercial, they could potentially support each other.
Sure.
It's operationally more complex, but they help each other out. Potentially.
Yeah.
Huh. So just think like complex doesn't necessarily mean that something's fragile. It can actually, it could be good. Number 6, messy deals age better than clean ones. It's just a fun way of saying there's more upside on messy deals. Because oftentimes the clean deals, they're just fully optimized from day one, right? Like they're good. You know what you're getting. The cash flow is what it is. Everything's set. Whereas with messy deals, you can fix those problems. You can get the leases to normalize. You can potentially reset and increase rents on things. And there's just different improvements that you can do that stack over time that makes this property more valuable. So time actually becomes your ally on a messy deal.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And you don't necessarily need to time like the purchase and sale perfectly. It becomes more of this inevitable, no, we've added value, we forced it, we're good. And so it just looks better over time. It ages better.
That makes sense. And often a messy property does require more effort or work.
Right.
And therefore the upside is bigger.
Yeah. Which I think comes back to like the goal is to solve problems, and if you're doing that, there's value there.
Yeah.
And messy deals, problems.
Yeah.
Yep. This one's kind of an interesting one. I think this is true. Number 7, banks only care about the end state. So it's kind of interesting when you talk to a bank, especially in the commercial space, like they get it if there's a property that has issues, but you have a solid business plan for how to fix it. They go, cool. Yeah, we're funding that plan for it. And now obviously they love ones that are also like, yeah, this is fully stabilized. We're good to go. No questions. Yes, like they get it. But they also get the other stories too. And sometimes they can even charge a little bit more interest because they recognize there's a little bit more risk. Like, yeah, cool, we're in. So it can work out there. Yeah. And then finally, and this one's a huge one. I saved one of the best for last. You're welcome. Is that local knowledge multiplies value in messy deals, right? So weird assets punish outsiders, right? Because I've seen some interesting deals that are just even not directly in my area. And I'm like, this looks really fascinating, but I don't know anything.
You don't know the market. You don't necessarily know potential buyers down the line.
Yeah. So if you understand like what the real tenant demand is and what the rents are related to that, if you understand like on, for example, for us out on the coast, like, oh, there are no contractors out there. It's not a thing. Like
right.
If you know that,
you
can underwrite it better and be prepared for it.
Sure.
Whereas if someone's just like, oh, whatever, it's on the coast, sounds great. And then a repair happens, they didn't underwrite it properly. Oh, dang.
Yeah.
And so you get advantages like that. And even if you are doing a project, like I got a project that we're looking to do, like I know contractor friends and I'm just like, dude, hey, can you come take a look at this? I'm love to get this thing solved. And so, so it's just a huge advantage for having that local knowledge.
That totally makes sense.
Messy deals.
Even some of the messy deals are messy for different reasons. Like I'm thinking a building in a historic district or something is like, all right, that's a little messy. It's a little different. But if you know the town or the commission that's working with it, like, you can deal with the mess and it's great. It might have a great upside. And, as some historian will buy it later for lots of money because they loved the restoration you did or whatever. I don't know.
Or you happen to know that there's some development that's coming through.
Right?
It's going to be there eventually. Yep. All that stuff.
Yeah.
So if you are an investor and you're talking to sponsors, like that might be one of the things that you're looking for. Like, hey, where is that mess? And why does it exist? And what are you going to do for it?
Yeah.
Which problems are priced in versus perhaps ignored or not thought about? What must go right versus what must not go wrong? I think is a good question. Oftentimes that's around like, how do you think you can actually generate those rents?
Yeah.
Do you think the rehab cost will actually be that? Those kind of questions.
Yep.
And then just, it's good to know, like, how does the complexity reduce competition here? Which oftentimes we're doing off-market deals anyways. And so it helps. But like we're looking at we just put in an offer on a couple houses that we're going to split the lot on again. And it's in Lebanon. And it's funny, actually, relative to Albany, we're like, oh man, it's actually really straightforward. It's a lot less messy. And
because of code or?
Yeah, they're a lot faster to process than Albany. And a lot of the utilities are already set in. There's no well, there's no shared stuff. So we're like, oh man, this is really straightforward. And there's not a manufactured home that you have to get like converted over. Things like that. So in conclusion, messy deals, they're not just necessarily just better by default, but they provide that asymmetry where you can solve problems and it creates that pricing distortion just at the very beginning part of it. It allows for some creativity, both in the operations and in the mix, and also in the financing of it. And because of those, assuming you're going through and solving them, time becomes your friend because it just becomes more valuable over time as you fix those problems.
Cool.
So that's why I like messy deals.
There you go.
Yeah. Kind of fun. Cool. Well, with that, we do regularly look at messy deals. And we have people who invest in them. And if you would be interested in learning what that looks like with us, you can check us out at furlo.com and learn all about our investing thesis and, again, the types of deals that we're doing. And
messy ones.
Messy deals, all the rage. It's pretty good. So with that, thanks for listening. Have a great day.